My name is Christy Talbot. Welcome to my YouTube channel. You probably haven't seen very much of me. I haven't posted on here very frequently in the past, and that's something that I want to remedy, so hopefully you'll be seeing more of me. Today I am here wearing my numerologist hat, and I am sharing with you a birth chart reading that I did for the Dalai Lama, actually. His chart is fascinating, and I'm really excited to go through it with you. My goal really is just to give people the opportunity to learn a little bit more about numerology, and specifically what types of information can be derived from a birth chart. So I've posted his actual chart here with the video that includes my detailed calculations for all of the core aspects of it. And so if you're interested in kind of learning more about how these numbers are calculated, look there. I'm not really going to go into too much detail on that end in the video. I'm going to try to stick more to the interpretation. So again, that's another resource for you. But like I said, for the purpose of the video, I'm really just going to kind of stick more to the interpretation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. When I look at a birth chart, there are two sources of information that I use, and they are a person's full date of birth, so the month, the day, and the year that they're born, and then their full name at birth. And so I start with the birth date, and for the Dalai Lama, his birthday is July 6th, so he has a birthday coming up, 1935. And any numbers that come from the birth date speak to energies that are external to a person, so they don't really talk too much about who a person is or kind of like their personality or their inherent traits that they're born with. It's really much more about external energy and the types of opportunities and experiences that they're likely to have over the course of a lifetime. So that's just an important thing to know when you are when you're looking at a birth chart in numerology. And the most important number that we get from the birth date is called the life path number, and that is the sum of all of the values of the birth month, day, and year all added up and then reduced either to a single digit number, 1 through 9, or if when you add them up they come to one of the two master numbers, 11 or 22, we keep them. We wouldn't reduce them. Otherwise, we reduce them to a number of 1 to 9. And what that number tells us, basically, is what a person's life purpose is. So why are they here? I get people all the time coming in for tarot readings who feel really lost and confused and don't know what they're supposed to be doing, don't know what their purpose is, don't feel fulfilled by what it is that they're doing in their lives, and feel like really off track, but don't know exactly what track it is that they're supposed to be on. And for me, this is one of the most powerful and most significant things that someone can gain from a numerology birth chart reading. And when we look at the Dalai Lama's life path number, when we add up all of the numbers in his birthday, we get the number 22, which is a master number. It is the most powerful number in numerology. It's a very significant number. It's a very spiritual number, and in terms of a life path lesson, it's an extremely significant lesson. When we look at the numbers of the life paths, like I said, they can be 1 through 9, 11, or 22. With each number, as we go up, the lessons get sort of more and more difficult, more and more challenging. So the Dalai Lama is tackling the most challenging lesson that you can be tackling over the course of a lifetime. So he's dealing with a very significant lesson. And basically, what he is here to do is he is here to attain great spiritual understanding. So the universe will provide him with opportunities to learn some great spiritual truths. And then he will be given the opportunity to use them and apply them in a practical way to build something. So whether it's an actual physical structure, whether it's some sort of organization, but he's supposed to build something, to create something that advances humanity, that moves humanity and mankind forward in a spiritual way. It's designed, it's something that he builds that will empower other people to live up to their greatest potential. So this is a heavy lesson. It's not something that's easy to accomplish. It requires a great deal of leadership ability. It requires a deep spirituality and intellect, and then ability to make things happen and to accomplish things and manifest things in the actual real world as well. And so, I just thought this was fascinating because this makes a lot of sense for what the Dalai Lama's life has been all about and the types of opportunities that he's had in his lifetime. Like I said, when we look at any number that comes from the birth dates, and particularly the life path, we really are talking more about energy that's external to someone. So it's really the universe is going to provide you with certain opportunities that are designed to force you to address this lesson, or to force you, or to give you the chance to accomplish the goals that are related to your life path number. And so he's been given all of these opportunities to do this, and clearly he's, you know, taken them on and embraced them. If you know about the Dalai Lama, he was selected, you know, randomly, you know, by spiritual leaders who identified him as the next incarnation of the Dalai Lama. And so, you know, the fact that he happened to be born on this day with this life path number that so perfectly suits that is really interesting to me. And so I was kind of blown away by that. I thought it was really cool. One of the challenges for this life path number is, you know, there's a great amount of pressure and burden and responsibility that comes along with it. And when we look at any of the master numbers, the 22 being one of them, we have to sometimes look at its lower vibration, which would be the number that it reduces to, which in this case, the 22 reduces to a 4. And so 4s are all about restrictions and burdens and hardship. And so sometimes if someone isn't living in alignment with their life path number, or doesn't have the skills and resources that they need in order to master it, they might view it through more of a negative lens, and they may see it as more restrictive and limiting. So that is another aspect of the 22 life path. I don't know if at any point in the Dalai Lama's life, perhaps he's felt that way. So that's his life path number. The next number that I look at then is the birth path number. And this is a person's date of birth, the day that they're born. So he's born on the 6th, so his birth path number would be a 6. And I look at the birth path in two ways. So the first way that I look at the birth path is that it kind of gives us a little bit of it narrows down the life path number a little bit, and it kind of gives us a little bit more detail about the person's life path and sort of the means or the vehicle through which that they will achieve that life path. And so the number 6 actually has to do with family and community and responsibility to others and taking care of others, but specifically taking care of your family and taking care of your community, your people. So again, I thought that was just really amazing because clearly, you know, the 22-6 life path, so the 22 life path and the 6 birth number combination, to me seems exactly to fit the Dalai Lama's life. Like I said, the birth path just gives us a little bit more of a narrow focus for the life path and gives us a bit more detail. Okay, so the second way that we can look at the birth path number is a little bit counter to what I said earlier, which was that, you know, any number in the birth date is going to speak to external energies and not really telling us much about who we are as individuals. This case, this is the one exception. In addition to narrowing down the focus of our life path, the birth path number also speaks to a special gift from the universe coming in the way of some kind of special talent or strength that we have that will help us to master our life purpose goals. The idea sort of being that we would never be asked to take on something without being given support or at least one kind of tool that we need in order to accomplish it or to achieve it. So that's another way of looking at the birth path. And so in the case of the Dalai Lama with the 6th birth path, we can say that he's also been given some special gifts in terms of being very sensitive and compassionate to other people. He would be very empathic, particularly in terms of having sensitivity for people in his family and his community, because again, like I said, that 6 number really relates to family and community. He would have a very strong sense of responsibility for them, but also wanting very much to help them and to nurture them and to take care of them. So that's a special gift that he's been given from the universe in terms of some inherent characteristics that will help him as he walks his life path. For the purposes of a birth chart reading, we're really kind of, for now, done with using the birth date. Those are the 2 big numbers that we get from the birth date, the life path and the birth path numbers. Now we're going to move on and look at the birth name, the full name at birth. And we slice and dice that all different ways to find out all sorts of things about a person. The one thing that the distinction I want to make is that, you know, generally speaking, anything that we get from the birth name is really going to speak to individual energy that a person is sort of born with, that's inherent to them. So we're going to learn more about their personalities, their motivations, their values, their strengths, their weaknesses, their talents, but it's inherent individual energy. And the way that we do this, and again, I'm not going to get too much into calculations for this, but every single letter in the alphabet has a numerical equivalent, and that is based on the letter's position in the alphabet, basically. And so, again, when we're looking at the birth name, we add those numbers up in all different sorts of ways to get all different kinds of information about a person. The most significant number that we derive from the birth name is called the expression number, and that is actually the sum of the numerical value of every single letter in the full birth name. So first, middle, and last name, we add all of them up, we take that sum. If it's a master number, an 11 or a 22, we keep it. Otherwise, we reduce it to a single digit number 1 through 9. And the expression number will tell us basically in sum, in total, what's your personal vibration? Who are you? What energy do you bring into this world? What were you born with? And, even more significantly, at your best, who are you? What's your greatest capacity? What's your greatest potential? When we look at the Dalai Lama, his expression number, it reduces to a number 1. And the number 1 is the leader, the number of the leader in numerology, has enormous amounts of leadership capacity and ability. Very much an individual person, an individualistic person, an independent person, very strong-willed, very confident, secure in themselves usually, very self-reliant, isn't afraid to kind of step out and take a stand and fight for something that they believe in, isn't afraid to kind of take the bullet for other people also. It's a very courageous type of number. And so this makes sense to me as being something that probably serves the Dalai Lama very well in terms of his life path. There isn't, the expression number isn't always a good fit for the life path number. And so in a birth chart reading, we will look at that. And if that's the case, kind of help people to think of solutions to kind of how to make that fit better. But in this case, I think it's, a very, very good fit. It helps to explain why he's, done pretty well with this very difficult life path. Because he has, this leadership capacity that is really necessary in order to accomplish the goals and the lessons of his life path. He's the head of state and the spiritual leader of Tibet, and he was identified at the age of 2 and took political power at the age of 15. So he had to stand up and step up and be a leader at a very young age. And fortunately, given his expression number, he had that ability. Next, we have the soul urge number. Again, this is taken from the full name at birth. It's actually the sum of the numerical equivalents of all of the vowels in the full birth name. So we add them all up, and if it's a master number, 11 or 22, we keep it. Otherwise, we reduce that down to a single digit number, 1 through 9. And the soul urge number, for me personally, I feel like it's the key to understanding a person at a very deep level. There are other numbers in the chart that kind of have more weight or are said to affect a person more. But to me, the soul urge number is just really key to getting somebody, to understanding what makes them tick. The soul urge number represents their greatest desire, what they want most. It tells us about what somebody values and what motivates their behavior. And I think what's interesting about this number is it's not always something that's out in the forefront. It's not something that people always open up and reveal to other people. It really depends on other numbers in a person's chart. From that, we can kind of tell how much they've sort of embraced or incorporated their soul urge or brought it out into the surface of, their everyday lives. For some people, though, it's really a very personal number and not something that other people would really know about them. And so by learning this, it really does help us to understand people a lot better. In the case of the Dalai Lama, I don't think his soul urge number is that much of a shocker. His soul urge number is a 7. It's actually reduced from a 16, and that's important. I'm going to get to that in a minute. But his soul urge is a 7, and the number 7 is sort of like the number of the mystic. It's a very spiritual number. It's a very introspective number. It's a very philosophical number. In the soul urge position, it's someone who really values wisdom and knowledge and wants to understand things at a very, very deep level, is a very deep thinker, is not a surface person by any stretch of the imagination, a very deep person. A lot of times in this position, it means they really do prefer their own company to other people. A lot of times the 7 can be a little bit withdrawn, and is probably more comfortable with talking about like things in a philosophical way or in theory than they are necessarily with like one-on-one human interaction and having to deal with emotions and that sort of thing. They're definitely more comfortable talking about things in a broader kind of way. But it is the number of, like I said, the spiritual leader, and they're really motivated by a desire to understand things. That really is the most important thing for a person with a 7 soul urge like the Dalai Lama has. What I would say, though, when I mentioned about the number 16, that it was significant, there are certain numbers in numerology that are associated with something called a karmic debt. And basically, they indicate a misuse of power or of energy in a previous lifetime. And so that because of that, we've been burdened in some way, or we have to carry some sort of baggage with us in this lifetime in order to sort of make up for that. And the number 16 is one of those karmic debt numbers. And 16 has to do with the ego. And a lot of times people with the 16-7 number anywhere in their chart sort of have a hard time opening up to other people. And sometimes have difficulty considering other people's perspectives, again, because there's this tendency towards sort of isolating themselves and not being so comfortable with emotion and that sort of thing. They sometimes maybe withdraw and they overvalue their own judgments and maybe undervalue other people's judgments or perceptions. And so there's a real need in this case for those people to really force themselves to open up and to consider other people's perspectives and other people's opinions, and not allow their ego to kind of dominate things and to think that they're always right or that they always have the answers. The next thing that we're going to look at is called the personality number, and it's actually the flip side to the soul urge. It is calculated by adding up the numerical values of the consonants in the full birth name. And what it tells us is how a person presents themselves on a day-to-day basis to the outside world and how other people generally perceive them. So whereas the soul urge number is just this very deep kind of energy and tells us about who a person is at their deepest, most private level, the personality number is not private. It's kind of on a day-to-day basis how we are with other people, how we interact with people, and the way that other people tend to see us. And what's interesting, the Dalai Lama's personality number is a number 3, which is very different from the number 7. The number 3 is extremely extroverted, extremely social, very dynamic, very, very charming, which is how the Dalai Lama is often described, very energetic. Someone who is a very, very good communicator and uses their communication abilities to inspire and uplift other people. So I think this, again, serves him very well in terms of his life path, which is, he has to empower and inspire other people. And so he's able to do this with this very dynamic personality that he has. We've actually covered all of the core elements of the Dalai Lama's birth chart. The core elements being those aspects of the chart that have the greatest impact on a person's life. The rest of the parts of the birth chart are sort of secondary, and they give us all different sorts of information, but their significance really depends on how they interact with other aspects of a person's chart. So it's really going to vary based on the individual how important these other things are. So what you'll notice if you're looking at the chart that I posted, I may sort of skim over or even skip over some parts of the chart, and that's because in the Dalai Lama's chart, they really aren't that important or that significant, whereas other parts of it I might spend a significant amount of time on because in his chart it's revealing. So that's just something that I wanted to point out. Every chart is different, and especially at this point forward, the importance of each of these aspects is really very much dependent on the rest of the chart, and you have to kind of look at it as a whole. So in looking at the Dalai Lama's chart, a couple things that I wanted to point out. So when we look at his first name, and we add up all of the numbers in his first name. This is called the growth number, and it's a number that it's sort of like an aspect of yourself, some skills that you have, some talents that you have that you can draw upon to overcome obstacles in your life. And the Dalai Lama's growth number is a 22. And I found this really interesting because something that sometimes people struggle with in numerology is the idea that your birth name has any kind of significance because, you know, we sort of think, well, didn't your parents give you your name sort of randomly, and how does it have any kind of correspondence to who you are as a person? Well, numerologists believe that a parent sort of has an inherent understanding or connection to their child, an intuitive connection to their child, and sort of knows intuitively what their child's personal vibration is and names them accordingly and gives them a name that matches it. And this is a great example of that because here the Dalai Lama's first name equals a 22, and this is his growth number. It's something that he can use to help him overcome challenges on his life path. And it's, you know, very few people are going to have this really significant master number, this 22 number in their name, and here he has it, and that's his life path number. So to me, it kind of gives credence to this idea that on some level, without even knowing it, because again, he was selected randomly when he was born, his parents did not know that he was going to be the spiritual leader of Tibet, but that on some intuitive level they did, because they gave him this name that fits so perfectly with it. So I thought that was really cool. And then the other thing that I wanted to look at is his last name. A lot of times in numerology, the last name, when we add up all of the number values of the letters in the last name, it's supposed to tell us kind of like what our legacy is, what our inheritance is from our ancestors, what types of kind of ideas or perspectives we inherit from our families, what's passed down to us. And so the Dalai Lama's last name adds up to the number 6, which is his birth path number. And so before we were talking about how, you know, his life path is this big number, this 22, to be this spiritual leader, to advance humanity, to move mankind forward in a spiritual way. But that this more narrow path is that he's really supposed to focus on his own community, his own people, and bringing his own people forward. And that was the number 6, and that number shows up in his last name, which again shows me sort of like that this was the importance of his people and of caring for other people and of being responsible for his people came from his family, that was something that his parents passed along to him. And again, it shows to me with this 22-6, he has the 22 with the first name and the 6 with the last name, that again, intuitively on some level, his parents understood who he was going to be. So I really thought that was really neat and really unique. Next, we're just going to look at a couple of special letters in the Dalai Lama's name. In numerology, we like to look at the first letter of the first name and the first vowel of the first name. Basically, their combined energy gives us a sense of how a person would approach a new opportunity. And so for the Dalai Lama, his first letter in his name is an L, which corresponds to the number 3. And the first vowel in his name is an A, which corresponds to the letter 1. What this basically tells us is that, again, this points to an enormous amount of leadership ability, that he basically approaches new opportunities in a positive way, like that 3 energy, which is very positive. He gets excited about new opportunities, but he also engages other people in them and tries to inspire other people and get other people involved. And then when we add in this 1 with the A, he takes on this leadership role, but in doing so, he's also at the same time empowering other people and bringing other people along, and getting other people excited and inspired about new opportunities as well. So those are 2 significant numbers in his name. The next thing that we look at sometimes in a person's name is called the balance number. And the balance number tells us how we deal with stressful situations. What do we do? And the way we get this is by looking at the initials in a person's name. The Dalai Lama does not have a middle name. If he did, we would use the first, the middle, and the last. The Dalai Lama's balance number is a 7. Which is interesting. That's a solar edge number 2. So it gives even more weight to that. And basically what it tells us is that when things get a little bit stressful, he prefers to kind of withdraw. He goes inside of himself. He really likes to work through things in his mind on his own. He becomes very philosophical, very introspective. Again, this sort of, and I've sort of hinted at this before, it sort of points to sometimes a little bit of an uncomfortableness with real intimacy and with, with real strong emotions. And that's going to come up in the next thing that I'm going to focus on as well. But when times get tough, he really goes inward. And this would also say that he relies on his spirituality as well to help get him through tough times. Next thing that we're going to look at very briefly is the Dalai Lama's temperament chart. The temperament chart in numerology is a very detailed analysis of a person's temperament or of their character, and it reveals a good deal of information about someone. And I would go into it with a client at length, but when it comes to the Dalai Lama's chart, I sort of feel like it would not be so interesting to you unless it's your own chart, and also maybe doesn't seem so appropriate to go into that level of detail about someone else. But what his chart does do is it sort of confirms a lot of what we've already seen in earlier parts of the reading, which is it portrays a very balanced individual. Someone who, when they're making decisions, really relies on a lot of sources of information in order to kind of decide what to do. That he does rely on his intellect a good deal, and that he probably does prefer that to anything else, but that he does also consider the emotional implications of any decision that he would make, particularly in terms of how it would impact other people. There does seem to be a little bit of a distrust, I would say, of his own emotions, that they're too changing, and so he doesn't necessarily rely on them or consider them so much when he's making a decision, that he really does think about it into a decision intellectually and then considers the impact that it would have on other people, which again very much mirrors some of the other energy that we've seen in his reading earlier, with the 6 as the birth path number. It makes him very empathic and makes him feel very responsible for other people. And so it makes sense to me that he would really consider how things affect other people before he would move forward in making any kinds of decision. His temperament chart also reveals a lot of physical strength, and that he would have a very strong connection to nature, and that nature would be where he goes to kind of connect and experience kind of joy and gives him sort of creative inspiration. That's where he draws from. Also in his temperament chart, we see a person who is very balanced in terms of being very creative, but also very practical. And again, that's mirrored in other parts of his chart, and it definitely would be helpful for him in terms of achieving his life path, which requires him to be a creative leader, which requires him to be a visionary and inspirational to other people, but also requires him to come up with practical solutions and practical ways of helping people. Okay, so now we're going to look at the challenge number, and for that we are going to jump back to the birth date. It's a number that we get by combining different elements of the birth date. I'm not going to go into details about the calculations. Again, you can look on that chart to see exactly how we get them. But we actually have 4 challenges over the course of our lifetime, and these are basically things that the universe presents to us. They're obstacles that stand in our way that we have to overcome in order to achieve or to master our life path. And when we look at a progress chart, I would go into great detail about them because each challenge appears at a very specific point in our lives, a very specific cycle in our lives. I mean, we can pinpoint it down to the specific year. And so when we look at a progress chart, we would go into great detail about the challenges that people are likely to face at specific points in their lives. However, there is one main overarching challenge that is with us throughout our entire lives. And so for that, I do look at that for the birth chart reading because it does influence a person throughout the course of their entire lives. And so in the Dalai Lama's case, he has a main challenge of a 2. And the 2 has to do with close interpersonal relationships. And as I said, there have been several indicators earlier on in the chart that could be a challenge for him. And basically what's going to happen is that life is going to put him in situations, basically, where he is forced to address this weakness that's represented by the number 2. So anytime we look at a challenge number, it's really a weakness that we have that life is going to force us to confront or to address. And so he's going to need to open up to other people and learn to let other people in and learn to be a little bit more comfortable with emotions. There are a couple indicators in the chart that maybe he tends to intellectualize emotions a little bit. And so this is an indicator that he's going to need to try to kind of open up and get to know people on a little bit of a deeper level than maybe he's been comfortable with. Also, I can see the 2 as being a challenge because perhaps given his life path, which is such an enormous responsibility, and it's a life path that very few people walk, that it may be hard for him to find peers and to find people who he can truly connect with. So I can see that as being the challenge as well. That makes sense to me that it's the challenge. But it is important that he learns how to do that and learns how to open up, because it's also very much tied into that karmic debt number that I was talking about earlier in his soul urge, that number 16, where it's very important that he learns to trust other people and trust other people's perspectives and weigh them against his own, and not just to rely on himself in terms of his perceptions. So this is his overarching challenge number, and it does give us a little bit more of insight into him and into his life experiences. The last number that we're going to look at is called the maturity number. And this actually combines both the life path and the expression number. So we actually add the life path number to the expression number. And then again, we keep the master numbers. Otherwise, we reduce them to a single digit number, 1 through 9. And basically what the maturity number tells us is, as we reach the age of maturity, and that kind of varies depending on the person, but let's say on average, that's like around age 40. Generally, we experience sort of a shift in perspective. Our perspective changes, and maybe some of our goals change a little bit. And that's because we've had some life experience under our belt, right? And our life experience is represented by the life path number, which is one of the 2 components of the maturity number. And at this point in our life, we've also learned a little bit more about ourselves, who we are. We understand ourselves better. And a lot of times we have come to a point of accepting ourselves, and we're more comfortable being authentic. And if we were to pick a number that represents our most authentic self, or our self in whole, that's that expression number, the other half of the maturity number. So basically, it's in sum our life experience and embracing our own personal vibration, our personal energy. Through that, we have a shift in perspective, and that is represented by the maturity number. Okay, so the Dalai Lama's maturity number is a number 5. And the number 5 is a much more relaxed energy than any of the other energies that we've seen in his chart so far. So to me, it would be a little bit stepping back a little bit, maybe relinquishing some control, especially if he feels that he's made progress, or he's achieved a lot of the things that he wants to achieve in terms of his life path, perhaps stepping back a little bit, relaxing a little bit. The 5 is also about opening up to other perspectives, considering non-traditional viewpoints, considering, just people's opinions who are maybe different than yours. And so that makes sense, again, in terms of when we're looking again at that karmic debt number and at his challenge number, that as he's gotten older, perhaps he has started to kind of open up a little bit. And so I think that's probably very helpful for him. Also, the 5 is the number of a traveler, of someone who wants to try new things and have new experiences. It's also the number of personal freedom. So, his whole life has been spent doing for his community, for his people, living for his people, feeling responsible for them. Later in life, I think perhaps he's going to shift a little bit, or has shifted a little bit, and has focused a little bit more on doing things for himself and enjoying his own personal freedom a little bit. So that's the Dalai Lama's chart in whole. I hope that it has been helpful to you, has been interesting to you. It should definitely give you a sense of the types of information that we can get from a birth chart. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to email me. My email address is tarotgirlnextdoor@gmail.com. So if you have questions about the chart, feel free to ask. Also, I would love to hear if you have any requests, special requests for maybe a celebrity or public figure who you'd like me to do a reading on. I'd love to do that. I'm planning over the summer to post a few more sample readings of public figures. So if there's someone that you're particularly interested in, please send your request to me by email as well. I look forward to hearing from you, and have a great day.